It wasn't the way she stopped humming in the kitchen. It wasn't the reading glasses she'd leave on her nightstand without saying goodnight. It wasn't even the Sunday afternoon she sat beside me on the porch swing for 40 minutes without saying a single word, just staring at the yard like she was looking at something I couldn't see. What told me everything was standing on my own front lawn at 10 minutes to midnight, watching a detective I had never met stretch yellow crime scene tape across the red front door I'd painted 32 years ago when we first moved in. I'm 63 years old. I spent 3 decades as a high school principal in a mid-sized town in western Pennsylvania. I've sat with grieving parents. I've had conversations with teenagers in crisis. I've delivered hard news more times than I can count. I thought I understood something about how life turns on you without warning. I didn't know anything. Let me go back to where this actually started. My wife and I met in our mid-20s, a church potluck dinner on a Saturday in late October. She brought a pasta salad that she confessed years later came straight from a store-bought kit, and I told her it was the best thing I'd eaten all year because she laughed when I said it, and I wanted to hear that laugh again as soon as possible. We were married 16 months later in a small ceremony with 40 people and a cake that leaned slightly to the left in every photograph. We built a real life. A house we renovated room by room over the years. 2 children, our daughter, who lives about 90 miles east with her husband, and our 2 grandchildren, and our son, who moved to Colorado in his late 20s and works in construction management. We had the kind of marriage that other people sometimes referenced when they talked about what a long marriage was supposed to look like. Steady, warm, rooted. She worked as a real estate agent for most of our marriage. Good at it in a way that had nothing to do with sales tactics. She had a quality of attention that made people feel genuinely heard. You could watch it happen in a room, the way a couple would come in guarded and skeptical and leave trusting her completely. I used to tell her that was her real talent, the listening. I've thought about that a great deal since everything happened. The first thing I noticed, or the first thing I allowed myself to file away as something to think about later, was about 10 months before that night. She started staying late on Tuesdays. Real estate has irregular hours. Listings don't care about evenings. I told myself that and mostly believed it. Then it became Thursdays as well, then occasional Saturdays. The phone was next. We had never been the kind of couple who policed each other's devices. It had simply never come up. But somewhere in the early spring of last year, her phone started going everywhere with her. Into the bathroom. Into her cardigan pocket when she moved from room to room. Face down on the kitchen counter when she was cooking. I noticed all of it and told myself each individual thing meant nothing. Around the same time, she started sleeping, turned away from me. That sounds like a small thing, and maybe it is. But after 38 years sharing a bed with someone, you know the geography of them, the way they settle, the position they default to, the particular quality of the quiet when they're genuinely asleep versus when they're lying awake. She started lying awake more often, and when I asked her what she was thinking about, she said work, or said nothing, or said she was fine, and closed her eyes. I want to be careful here about something. I am not telling you this story to make myself look like a victim who missed all the signs, because I don't think that is entirely honest. I think I noticed. I think somewhere deeper than the part of my brain I was choosing to use, I understood that something was happening. But there is a particular kind of self-protective blindness that sets in after you have loved someone for nearly 4 decades. It is not stupidity. It is something closer to survival instinct, the sense that if you name the thing, it becomes real, and as long as it remains unnamed, you can keep the version of your life that you have built. I chose the unnamed version for too long. I asked her directly once, washing dishes together on a Tuesday evening in June, standing side by side at the sink the way we had done 10,000 times. I asked if she thought we were okay. She kept washing the bowl she was working on, didn't look up immediately, then looked at me and said yes, she thought so. She said she'd been tired. She said the spring market had been harder than usual. She said she just needed the summer to settle down. I said okay. I put the dishes away. I didn't push. I have turned that moment over in my mind many times since. By August, the feeling between us was something I could almost sit on the other side of and observe. We shared space. We were functional. We were polite in the way that long-married people can sometimes mistake for harmony. But the thing that had always existed underneath the warmth, the ease, the particular pleasure of being known by one person over a long stretch of time that was gone, or it had moved somewhere I couldn't reach. Our daughter called me one Sunday when my wife was out at an open house. My grandchildren were noisy in the background on her end, and she lowered her voice and asked me if Mom was okay. I said what I'd been telling myself: work, stress, busy season, she just needed some rest. There was a pause on the line. "Dad," she said, in the voice she has used since she was a teenager to let me know she thinks I'm being willfully obtuse. "I'm aware," I said, which was the most honest thing I'd said about it out loud. "Okay," she said, and we talked about the grandchildren for a while and hung up. 3.5 weeks before the night, everything changed. My wife sat down across from me at the kitchen table after dinner. Not the couch, where we usually ended up. The kitchen table. She had her hands folded in front of her and she looked at them while she talked. She said she needed some time. A few days of quiet in the house, alone, to think through some things. She asked if I could go stay with our daughter for a while. I sat there and looked at her for a moment. "Think through what things?" I asked. "Just things," she said, still not looking up. "I'm not trying to hurt you. I just need some space to get my head clear. Please." I want to tell you that I said no, that I told her she owed me an actual conversation about what was happening in our marriage, that I had been patient for months and I deserved to understand what was going on. I want to tell you I held my ground. What I did was go upstairs and pack a bag. I've asked myself why so many times that the question has nearly lost its shape. Maybe it was 38 years of knowing when she was at a wall I couldn't get through by pushing. Maybe it was cowardice wearing the costume of consideration. Maybe it was some part of me that already understood, at a level below language, that the conversation waiting on the other side of that question was one I was not ready to have. Maybe all three. Probably all three. I drove to my daughter's that evening. I told her my wife needed some quiet time at home and I was going to stay a few days. My daughter looked at me for a long moment and didn't say the thing I could see her thinking, which I appreciated. My grandchildren were 9 and 6. The 9-year-old was deep in a phase involving elaborate Lego structures, and the 6-year-old wanted me to read the same picture book approximately every evening of my visit, which I did. There is something that I can only describe as merciful about being needed for simple things by small people. It keeps you from disappearing entirely into your own head. I texted my wife on the first evening to let her know I'd arrived. She responded that she was glad and that she'd call soon. She didn't call. I checked my phone constantly for 3 days, with the low-grade obsessive anxiety of a man trying not to admit he is waiting for something. On the third night, at 11:14 in the evening, my neighbor called. I need to explain who this woman is. She and my wife had been close friends for more than 20 years. They walked together on Tuesday mornings. They had stood in each other's kitchens through everything life had handed them: illness, aging parents, career changes, the quiet, particular struggles that long friendships hold. She was not a person who called late at night. She was not a person who panicked. When I saw her name on my phone at that hour, some essential thing in me understood before I answered that this was not a normal call. She told me I needed to come home. Her voice was controlled in the way that takes effort. She said there were police at my house and she was there now and she didn't know all of what had happened, but she thought I needed to be there in person. I asked if my wife was okay. A pause. Not long, but long enough. "She's with the police right now," she said. "I think she's physically okay. Please just come." I told my daughter I had to leave, that something had come up at home. Her face in the doorway as I backed out of the driveway is something I keep seeing. The drive takes about an hour and 45 minutes on a normal day. I made it in just over an hour. I do not recommend that, and I can tell you almost nothing about the road between there and home. What I remember is my street. The lights first. Blue and red cycling against the houses, against the trees, against the cars parked along the curb. 2 police cruisers and what I recognized as an unmarked detective's vehicle. Yellow crime scene tape across my front door. My front door, which I had painted red before my children could walk. My neighbor was standing on the front lawn with her arms folded tight across her chest. A uniformed officer stepped toward me before I could reach her. "Sir, I need to ask you to step back. This is an active scene." "This is my house," I said. My voice came out flatter and steadier than I expected. He asked my name, radioed something I couldn't fully hear, then asked me to wait. My neighbor reached me. She put her hand on my forearm. "Is she hurt?" I said. "The bruising on her arm," she said carefully. "But she's standing. She's talking. She's okay." She said there had been a man at my house. An ambulance had come about 2 hours before I arrived. The man had been taken to the hospital. A man. In my house. I heard each word clearly. They didn't assemble. I stood there on the lawn I had mowed every 2 weeks for 32 years and waited. Detective Walsh came through the front door about 7 or 8 minutes later. Heavyset man, mid-50s, the measured, unhurried manner of someone who has learned that slowness signals control. He introduced himself and said he'd like to speak with me. He said my wife was inside and was cooperating fully. He said the man who had been taken to the hospital was in stable condition. I went inside. The living room had that particular quality of wrongness that a room gets when something violent has happened in it. Furniture slightly displaced, a lamp on the floor, a broken glass someone had partially cleaned up, my wife's reading glasses on the floor near the couch, one lens cracked. I won't reconstruct the full 2 hours of conversation that followed, partly because my memory of it comes in sections rather than as a continuous whole, and partly because some of it belongs to her and I don't feel entitled to all of it. What Detective Walsh told me, and what my wife told me later when we were in the same room, and what I pieced together over the following weeks, approximately 14 months before that night, my wife had reconnected with a man she had briefly dated in her late teens. Before we met, an alumni social media page, a message that started as catching up. Her listening quality, the way it drew people in, it worked in all directions. I don't know at what point it moved from nostalgia into something else. She didn't describe that timeline to me in detail, and I didn't ask her to. What I know is that, by the previous winter, they had been meeting in person. Tuesday evenings. Thursday evenings. The phone that went everywhere. She had tried to end it. This is the part that took me a long time to hold both in the same hand, the fact of what she had done and the fact that she had tried to stop it and found that stopping was not simple. He had not responded well to the ending. He had become persistent. Then he had become something beyond persistent. That evening, he had come to my house uninvited. She had been alone. She had told him again that it was finished. He had not left. The conversation had deteriorated into something that was no longer a conversation. He had grabbed her arm hard enough that the bruising was already dark and clear by the time the police arrived. She had gotten to her phone. She had called 911. The details of exactly what happened in the minutes between that and when the paramedics arrived were still being sorted out when I was sitting there, and I'll leave them there. When they let us be in the same room, we stood about 5 feet apart in our own living room. She had a bruise on her right forearm in the shape of a grip. Her eyes were swollen. She'd been crying for hours. She looked at me and said my name. I didn't say anything for what felt like a very long time. There is a kind of grief that I did not have a name for until that night. It is the grief of looking at the face of someone you have loved for most of your adult life, someone who has been the central fact of your daily existence for 38 years, and understanding that you did not know them as fully as you believed. Not a small thing left out. A whole season of their life running alongside yours without touching it. It doesn't arrive as rage at first. It arrives as a profound and disorienting dizziness, like stepping off a curb you didn't know was there. "I'm sorry," she said. It came out cracked. I nodded. I said I was glad she was physically safe, and I meant that. I meant it cleanly and without any performance. Whatever else was true, she was standing in front of me and not in an ambulance, and I was grateful for that. Then I walked outside and sat down on the front porch steps. I couldn't make myself take the crime scene tape off the door. I just sat beside it. My neighbor came and sat next to me without speaking. After a while, she put her hand over mine on the step. We stayed like that until nearly 2 in the morning. I drove back to my daughter's house that night. It's a decision I've thought about since whether I should have stayed, what it meant that I left again. What I know is that I could not sleep in that house that night. I could not be in those rooms. My daughter was awake in the kitchen when I got there. The light was on over the sink the way she always leaves it. She took one look at my face and didn't say anything for a moment. Then she said to sit down and made tea she knew I wouldn't drink and waited. I told her everything I knew. She cried in the way she cries, silently, with her jaw tight. She said things about her mother that I understood. Then she stopped saying them. We sat together in the kitchen for a long time without talking, and that was exactly what I needed. My son is harder to read than his sister, more interior. When I called him the next morning, he listened to the whole thing without interrupting. When I finished, there was a long pause, and then he said, "Dad, what do you need right now?" Just that. Not his opinion about his mother, not a plan, not reassurance. Just, what do you need? I have turned that question over in my hands like a river stone for months. The weeks after were the particular misery of having to function while the world you thought you were living in slowly reveals its actual shape. The man who had been taken to the hospital recovered and did not press charges. He had a complicated situation of his own that made police involvement undesirable for him. My wife was not charged. The investigation concluded she had been the one in danger and the one who called for help. But legality, as it turned out, was almost a separate matter from everything else. We had several long conversations in the weeks that followed. She told me things I had not known. How the distance between us had not begun with him, how it had been accumulating for years before that, quietly. In all the ways I've described, and in some I'd missed entirely. She told me she had felt unseen. That, somewhere along the way, she had stopped believing we were going to find our way back to something real, and that she had made a choice from that place of having given up. I want to be honest about my own part in this because I think dishonesty is a disservice. When I looked back through the most rigorous version of my memory, not the one that was kind to me, I could see places where I had failed her, in the ordinary, daily ways that accumulate into something larger. I was present in the physical spaces of our life and absent in some of the ways that mattered. I had a habit of listening just enough and not all the way. I don't say that to spread the responsibility in a way that minimizes what she chose to do. I say it because the truth of a 38-year marriage is not owned entirely by either person. I moved out about 7 weeks after that night. I found a 2-bedroom apartment in the same town. I wanted to stay near the life I had, even while the shape of it was changing entirely. I took my books, my fishing equipment, the old coffee maker I've had for 16 years, the photograph of my grandchildren from last Christmas. My daughter called every day for the first 6 weeks, sometimes for an hour, sometimes for 5 minutes that were mostly just her making sure I was still there. My son sent me a text most mornings, a news article, a photograph, something about a trout stream in Colorado he thought I'd like. He's always understood that presence doesn't require explanation. People in town found out. That's how small towns work. Some people were exactly as kind as I hoped. Some people performed a kind of taking of sides that I tried not to let calcify into bitterness. Some people avoided me because they didn't know what to say, which I eventually stopped interpreting as a judgment. My wife and I are separated, and the divorce will be final sometime in the next few months. She is still in the house. I drove by it once, about 4 months after everything happened, and the front door is blue now. She painted it. I sat outside in my car for a moment, looking at the blue door, and I did not know what to do with what I was feeling, which I think is an honest answer to a complicated thing. Here is what I have come to understand in the time since that night. I understand that the moment my neighbor's name appeared on my phone at 11:14 in the evening, the version of my life I had been living came to an end. Not because of what she was calling to tell me, but because that version was already something other than what I thought it was. The call just made it visible. I understand that being a person who loved someone well for a long time does not guarantee you immunity from being failed by them. That's not cynicism, it's just true. I understand that my son's question, "What do you need right now?" is one of the most important questions a person can ask another person, and I am trying to become someone who asks it more. Of others, and more honestly of myself. I understand that spending the evenings alone, which I thought would be the worst part of all of this, has turned out to be something more complicated. Some evenings it is quiet in a way that has a low-grade peace in it. Some evenings it is the loneliest I have ever been. Both things exist, and neither one cancels the other. I'm not going to tell you that I have arrived at some resolved and finished version of myself, because that would be a performance of healing rather than the actual process of it. What I can tell you is that last month, my granddaughter asked me to read her the same picture book 4 times in a row on a Saturday afternoon, and I said yes all 4 times. And somewhere in the middle of the 3rd reading, I realized that for those 45 minutes I hadn't been thinking about any of it. Just her and the book and the particular pleasure of a small person settling against your side because she trusts you to be there. That's not nothing. Some days that's everything. I think about something a colleague told me a long time ago, during a stretch of hard months at work, that seems almost quaint in comparison to this. He said, "You don't have to see the whole road. You just have to see enough of it to take the next step." I've been trying to drive that way, one stretch of road at a time, just far enough ahead to keep going. If you're somewhere in the middle of something that feels like the ground shifting under you, and I know some of you are, because that's often why people end up staying to the end of a story like this. I'm not going to offer you a formula. I don't have one, and I'd be suspicious of anyone who did. What I'll offer instead is this. The people who sit with you without needing to fix it, who ask what you need without filling in the answer for you, who show up with small, ordinary acts of presence over a long time, those people are not incidental. They are the whole point. Whatever shape your life takes from here, try to keep those people close. And if nobody has asked you lately, what do you need right now? Whatever the answer is, it's worth sitting with. Take care of yourselves out there.